Welcome back to It's About Time. It's been a couple of months since I posted a video to this series, so I apologize for that, but I had other things that was keeping me busy, but I'm back now and I'm hoping to add more videos on a more regular basis. So keep checking back and I appreciate you checking in. So now with a couple of videos into the series, you understand the different flavors of fire. So maybe you think that you can get by with lean fire, which requires a little bit less money when you finally retire, or versus fat fire, which is where I am going, where you want to live a more luxurious life and you're going to need quite the nest egg to do it. And at this point, you probably have thought about the expenses that you're going to face in retirement, and you've watched my video and read the article on how you form a budget and why you need one, so you have an understanding of what your needs are in retirement. So I always start with forming a budget because I strongly believe that if you know where you need to go, or at least the general direction, you can then form a plan on how to get there. So that's why I always start with forming a budget and trying to get a grasp of all of your expenses that you think you'll face, and then we can form a plan to get there. So now that we've done that, what's the next step that you need to do? Well, the first step after doing all of the introductory stuff is to actually start saving. And it doesn't really matter how much you can save at this point, but the most important thing to realize is that time is on your side. So if you're in your early 20s and you think that retirement is some 40 years out, because currently the full retirement age is like 67, right? So you could be looking at 42, 43 years. It's a long time, but that works to your advantage. And it basically means that if you're even able to save something like $40 a week in your early 20s and keep adding to that every week for the next 42, 43 years, you're well on your way to having more than $1 million by the time you retire at the traditional age, right? Hopefully we're going to increase that over time, but the most important thing to do is to start saving. So that's step one. If you have not already done that, start saving and investing it. And we'll talk a little bit about what you should invest in later in the video, but just start. So a couple of ways to start is, you can either participate in your employer's plan if they have a 401k type plan, or you can just open up your own IRA and just start socking money away. Now, if you have access to a 401k or an IRA, I would highly suggest that you look for the Roth option when possible, especially if you're younger. The main reason for that is that when you're starting out in your career, you're likely at the low end of your income range, which also means that you're going to be at the low end of the taxes you have to pay. And that's the best time to start saving up for a Roth account. The other reason for that is that when you start early with a Roth account, because it grows tax-free, and when you take out the money later on, it's also not taxed, you're giving it all the time that you have to let it grow. Okay? So it's very important to do that. So start saving. Step two would be to ask your employer benefits folks if there is a 401k and get enrolled if you are not already enrolled. Once you enroll, you have an option to either stay in the 401k and save there, or you can save in your own IRA. The reason you may want to save in the 401k versus the IRA, I'll just give you some overview, is that there is a lower limit on the IRA. So typically in a year you can save about $6,000 to an IRA, whereas currently the limit on a 401k is much higher. It's $19,500 for 2021. And you may look at that and say, well, there's no way I can save that much, right now. That's fine, but keep that in mind that when you do $6,000 a year, you may want to save a lot more than that very quickly. So you just get to choose between an IRA or 401k. After you start saving, whether it's with an IRA or a 401k, next thing to do with your benefits folks is to start asking questions about the plan. One of the most important things you can ask your benefits folks about your 401k plan are the fees that are involved. So a lot of times there are fees to manage the plan, to pay trustees and record keepers and all of that stuff. But what you want to do is you want to understand the fees that are involved in the plan and more importantly, who pays for it. So typically the employer will pay for the administration of the plan, and then anything that you're doing in terms of selecting investments, and there are fees associated with it, or if you're using certain plan features like taking out a loan against your balance, you're going to be bearing those costs. Now, I just mentioned loans. I would not advise that you do that, but we'll talk about that down the road. So now that you've started saving and you figured out that either you're going to save in your employer's 401k plan or your IRA, and you've asked about fees and things like that, you need to consider what kind of investments you want to invest in. If you don't have an idea of what to invest in, I would highly recommend one of two options to start, and then we can refine it as we get deeper into the series. So if you have an option to invest in what's called a target date fund, TDF fund, do that. And basically what it is it looks at the year that you think you're going to retire, and you just pick it, and it does all of the rebalancing and all of that automatically. So if you're 25 in 2021 and you think that you're going to retire in 40 years, then you would pick a 2060 target date fund and buy into that with periodic investments and let it do all of the rebalancing and whatever, and you don't have to worry about it. So that's one option. Those funds have a variety of fees depending on the provider. Some can be very reasonable and others can be a lot more expensive. But even if it is expensive, it's a good place to start until you start to refine your investment portfolio. If you don't have that or are not interested in target date funds in your plan, then the next thing I would suggest is a broad market index fund. So either something like the S&P 500 or something comparable to the Vanguard Total Stock Market fund. So there are a lot of providers for these type of funds. You can either go with Vanguard directly or Schwab or Fidelity or whoever, but they will likely have some kind of broad market fund that will be tracking very close to each other. So it doesn't really matter if you do the Vanguard Total Stock Market Fund or an S&P 500 fund or anything of that nature, because they will be very similar. If you have several options to select from and you think they're all comparable, then the criteria that you should use to select them is the fees that you have to pay to hold these investments. So these fees are charged by the funds themselves, and oftentimes they're called the expense ratio of the fund or the ETF. Now, when you're comparing these expense ratio, the difference that you may see is 0.5 of a percentage point. And it doesn't seem like it's a big deal, but trust me, it is over 40 years. So when you're faced with an option between two different funds that look very similar, the best thing you can do is pick the one with the lowest fund, and you'll come out ahead. Anyways, that's it for this video. Over the next couple of more videos, we'll talk a little bit more about what you can do with your budget, your current budget that is, once you have an idea of what your expenses are and how you can squeeze some more savings out of it. But in any case, I hope you enjoy the video, and please come back and check, and I will promise to try to be more regular with the posting of videos. All right, take care. Bye.